Welcome to another episode of Operating the DECam Community Pipeline. In this episode, we will show submitting data to the Astro Archive after the data sets have been processed by the pipeline. When a data set is completed, the results are placed in the queue directory. We will now go to that queue directory. With the shortcut cdq. The data sets currently finished but not submitted are these three. One thing that you need to look at is what data needs to be submitted. The command to use stdcount, and then the data sets, which are the DTS data sets. So we'll do */*DTS. And this shows the data set name without the -DTS, how many are pending, and how many are submitted. So nothing has been submitted. As described in the operator's guide, submitting a data set really has two parts: renaming the data sets from the pipeline naming convention to the archive naming convention. For the operator, the important part of the archive naming convention is the area called the version, though it really can be any string at all. Submit count does have an option to tell you which ones have been renamed and which ones have not. -P means the pipeline names, and -N means the NSA or NOIR Science Archive, and nothing. So none of these have been renamed. There are two commands that are used for submitting to the archive: submit and submit blocks. Submit will submit everything that has been specified as an argument, and submit blocks does the same thing, but it does it in chunks of files so that one has more control over how much has gone into the submission queue for the archive. As mentioned, there are two steps. So normally both steps are done in one command, but it's possible to do just the renaming separately. So I'm going to rename one of these data sets. Command submit has various options. If you use the -N flag, that does just the renaming without submitting anything into the directory where the archive will pick things up. By default, submit immediately runs in the background, and information is stored in a log file. But sometimes you can run it without the background option, -B, if you then want to have the command line wait until it finishes execution. So let us rename only the data set the data under 053220607. Without specifying a version value, it will default to V1, which is the common value for a first standard processing that goes into the archive. To change what version number, you use the V flag and add some string. So let us proceed to submit. The log file for the renaming is found in the final directory, which in this case is one directory above where we are. So with log. So this says we started on June 8th. It's checking to see if anything needs to be renamed, and then it's renaming to the NSA convention. This is done by while it's running, there are two files being created: NSA list, NSA name list, which are the new names in the archive format, and NSA name CSH, which is the set of commands that will be executed when it finishes, which is to rename. And here is the pipeline name. Here we go. This is what a pipeline name looks like, with the queue and the date and the proc ID, the filter, and the obs date and the type. And it gets renamed to the C4D names like this. As long as you see these two files, and it's in the process of doing the renames. While it's doing the renames, you can't do it again. There is a lock file, again, in the final directory, N for the renames. And now those files are gone. If after creating these files, it checks to see if there are files by the same name in the archive. If something is found, then a file NSA name.irods will appear with the list of archive names. By being careful, the operator should be able to avoid that. So now if we do our STB count of NSA names only, we see the 053 proposal data has been renamed to the C4D convention. And one can look in the directory for those files. To submit them, let's just submit those. Well, we'll use submit blocks. Submit blocks takes us some of the same arguments. Since we already renamed, we don't have to worry about the version number. And we only want to do by 3. Submit blocks does not automatically go in the background, so we will make it a background job. What submit blocks will do is, over a specified period of time, the default being an hour, it will submit a particular number of files. The default is 240. 240 per hour is roughly what the ingest mechanism for the Astro Archive can do. So what happens when you're submitting is the files get copied to a directory that the archive ingest process called TDA will periodically look in that directory, and that directory can be gone to by submitted. And there you see the files sitting there. TDA picks up files, but it doesn't remove them. We want to leave the files around until we have confirmed they've gotten in the archive. So now I'm back in the dataset directory. And now let's look. And what the submission process also does is it makes links to those files in the submitted subdirectory of the data set. And this is important because it allows removing files by data set without by knowing which data set it is. And then you see this version file which contains whatever version was used. If one needs to rename, then that file has to be deleted manually. So now let's go look at our submitted again, our STB count command. I have to be in the right directory. And it shows this 240 have been submitted, all from the G band, and then 117 out of the I band. After an hour, it will remove those. We'll check that they're in the archive, remove them, and submit another 240. I'll now pause while this goes on. Another helpful simple monitor is called submitmon. And it takes either a directory that contains the DTS subdirectories or a path. And like Simplemon, which you would have learned about in one of the previous episodes, this simple monitor just refreshes the screen periodically. The default is every 5 minutes. And this is useful to keep up to monitor. It shows you when it's going to do an update again, what directory, and then the submit blocks. You notice that we had 240, now it's 236. The other thing submitmon does is during its refresh cycle, it will remove files that have been ingested in the archive. In other words, it checks if that file is present in the archive and then deletes the file from the 2 places that they exist. And this then shows you that when the next block will be submitted. In another episode, you also saw the commands AR status and AR stat. AR stat being a wrapper around AR status to just show you which data has not been fully submitted to the archive. So I use AR stat. And what this is showing you is that now 5 exposures have been recorded in the archive and 65 left to go. Here's the 053 data set. What the operator has to do is get all of these data sets into the archive, processed and into the archive. I'm going to interrupt the submission and redo it and continue on in a different way. Submit and submit blocks looks at the lock file. So I'm going to remove a lock file. It's in the final directory. That doesn't mean submissions have stopped, because once files are put into the submit directory, they go into the tada queue. And you can see here on the monitor data being ingested. So the alias PSG is very useful. It's a PS followed by grep. It's sleep. And what we see here is a 1 hour sleep, which is the submit blocks. It's a 5 minute sleep, which is the submit mon, and a 6 minute sleep, which is a process in the pipeline that checks for failures. So what we can do is kill the 1 hour sleep. K is an alias that transfers to kill -9. And so by killing the sleep, it made submit blocks go into its next loop. And because the lock file had been removed, it said, oh, I've been asked to quit. And when submit blocks finishes, it submits a final process with a 3 hour sleep to do a final cleanup. So here it says sleep until 6:23 p.m. for this final clean, even though there's 175 files. But now that the lock file's gone and it's in this other background job, we're going to submit the rest of the data that's waiting to be submitted. And this will be the combination of both renaming and submitting. There is an option in submit blocks that rather than taking the data set that was data sets that were put in the command line and then quitting when it finishes them, go into a mode where it continues to look for new data sets arriving. As you see up here, processing is continuing on other data sets. So it takes a template and it's quoted so that we can pass the template into the script rather than have it expand on before it gets picked up. So we're just going to say take everything that has a subdirectory from a particular proposal and date, and then all its DTS directories. And then we will again put it in the background. Things are slow because the community pipeline is processing in particularly heavy duty CCD proc pipeline. I'm waiting for it to start to do the rename. Let's restart the submit them on to check. So now we're looking at everything. So it continued on to submit the rest of the 053 data set. I was waiting to show that when the renaming is going on, instead of NSA name, it's STB name, or stbnsa.list, stbnsa.csh, and stbnsa name.irods if files are already in the archive. So at this point, files are being submitted in blocks of 240. And this will go on for a while. And as these data sets in the pipeline monitor finish, they will also be picked up by this -A option. So I hope that's been helpful. Stay tuned for another episode.